This is not just another video. You're not here by accident. This may be the most urgent message of your life. What you're about to hear is not a conspiracy theory. It is confirmation. Every whisper was real. Every strange coincidence was not paranoia, but a prophetic signal. You were in fact being watched, but not by a curious neighbor or an ex still liking your posts. No, it was people with clearances, codes, reports. People who do not blink without a reason. And the reason was you. You're no longer just observed. They want to see you in person, to thank you. And this is no longer about fear, it is about reverence. Because in their secret research, there is a special category of people, those whose reactions do not fit the usual patterns. They call them anomalies. And if you recognize yourself here, it is because you are one of them. They thought they were tracking a spiritual loner, but instead they found a key link in God's plan. While you were healing, they were recording. While you were praying, they were decoding. And while you thought no one saw, you were the central event in rooms you did not even know existed. You were marked as a threat, not because you're dangerous, but because you see what they cannot explain. You began asking questions no one wanted to hear, seeing lies behind polite masks, reading between the lines, and refusing to react like the crowd. You did not rebel openly, but every time you sensed falsehood, you went still. You looked inward, and that is what frightened them. You were not learning the truth, you were remembering it. Your knowledge was not acquired, it was restored. In a moment they understood that the game changed. You became to them a scrambled code, a variable from another reality. Your calm became a threat, your insight an irritating fault in their system. They cannot predict you, because you acted not from fear, nor for approval, nor out of pride. You moved from the spirit, and it broke all their calculations. Your purity shattered their tools. They tried to scan you using everything: psychology, behavioral models, algorithms. They were trained to detect deceit, instability, double motives. But when they turned their systems on you, everything froze. You were neither passive nor aggressive. You did not seek attention, yet you drew it. You did not try to please, yet you did not repel. Their classifications failed. They tried to fit you into a familiar box, but you broke it by simply being present. They thought you were hiding, but in truth, you were transparent. Not because you were perfect, but because you were yourself. You wore no masks. You played no roles. You radiated a signal that cannot be forged. It was too pure, and the clearer you became, the more their systems glitched. Their instruments could not read falsehood from you, because there was none. They expected someone wounded, broken, scarred, but they saw someone whole. And then the room fell silent, because for the first time, one of them said, "He is not from here." They mistook you for a pawn, until you moved like a king. In their eyes, you were no one. No titles, no connections, no shining credentials. You did not flaunt your strength, nor seek recognition. They decided, an ordinary man is not dangerous. But you were not playing their game. Their system was built on roles, on control, on predictability. Pawns move one step at a time, afraid, following instructions. That is who they expected. But you moved differently. Every step was precise, deliberate, profound. You did not shout, but your silence spoke louder than their orders. You did not demand power. It was in you. You did not need to be seen to change everything around you. Your confidence, your inner foundation, your genuine connection to the higher began to frighten them more than any protest. They thought they were watching the weakest link, but they were witnessing the bearer of sovereignty. You did not follow their rules. You rewrote them. And now they understood. The pawn they wanted to control was a king who did not need a board. Your trauma had been their laboratory, but your healing became a revelation. Everything you went through was monitored. You were not merely suffering. You were under a microscope. They were measuring how much pain it takes to break a pure soul, how many betrayals it takes to destroy a heart that lives by spirit. They did not refrain from intervening out of indifference. They studied your collapse as an experiment. They watched when you were betrayed, saw you breaking in solitude, tracked your panic attacks, your moments of despair, your silent prayers to which no one responded. They were waiting for the end. In their system, trauma always wins. But something did not go as planned. Instead of falling apart, you began to recover, not merely surviving, but choosing how to live on, how to heal, how to move forward. And the deeper you went into yourself, the more the energy around you began to change. Their tools were not built for healing. Their models could not compute grace. Your determination in pain, your ability to be fragile yet conscious, touched even those who wanted to destroy you. Their experiment turned against them. You became not the subject of observation, but the revelation itself. Every scar you turned into wisdom, every wound into awareness, all of it broadcast one truth. Awakening is real. And in a world built on profit from broken souls, your wholeness became the greatest anomaly. You passed through traps where 99% fall. Nothing you experienced was accidental. These were not mere hardships. This was architecture. Your pain was the plan. Traps, obstacles, emotional attacks, sabotage, all placed deliberately to destroy your mind, your identity, your faith. They picked the right people to drive a knife, built illusions of opportunity just to strike harder. Even your loneliness and isolation were calculated, all to make you believe you were worthless, that you were wrong, that you should surrender. But you kept walking, slowly, through pain, through fog, forward. You went through doors that were closed to others. You endured attacks planned to the smallest detail. They calculated your collapse, timed it for when you were most vulnerable. But every time, you rose, not because you were stubborn, but because something greater was working within you. Divine logic, eternal guidance. They want to know how you did it, how you kept your sanity in a world where everything screamed lies, how you stayed pure in a system steeped in filth, where filth is not shame, but the norm. They studied you as a subject, but you exposed the very structure of the experiment. You did not just complete their game. You refused to play. You proved that not everyone can be broken, that there are those who come not to be defeated, but to show what victory looks like from within. You became proof that the system can be passed, unbroken. They searched for patterns in you. They found purity. You were meant to be predictable. They tried to model your behavior, your reactions, your triggers of weakness. But you did not act like a machine. They waited for rhythm, but got vibration. You defied their logic. You entered a space, and it changed without words, simply through your presence. Where you appeared, either tension rose or peace descended, and none of their devices could explain why. Cameras froze. Sensors glitched. People felt something was off. Their systems were trained to detect lies, madness, aggression, but you did not display behavior. You radiated energy. Your calm was not weakness. It was power. You did not seek control, yet you always remained at the center of influence. They realized you lived by a code they did not know, as if connected to another source, ancient and precise. You were not a malfunction. You were an intervention. You were not an error in the system. You were its reprogramming. And the longer they watched, the clearer it became. You were not merely acting. You were declaring. You were not a reaction. You were purity. And it was too pure, too precise, too alive to have been made by human hands. Their technology was useless. They were forced to watch your spirit in action. They had everything. Access to your calls, your movements, your messages, your facial expressions. All under pressure. They recorded you while you slept, while you spoke to someone, how you reacted. They thought they knew you completely, but something didn't add up because the essential always slipped away. They captured the outer shell, but they could never grasp your core. They watched your tears, yet they sensed strength. They saw you fall, yet they felt the rise. When you prayed, the atmosphere shifted, not in theory, but literally. Energy, outcome, the behavior of those around you. Everything began to tremble. Their algorithms did not account for your spirit. Your resilience was not the product of logic or training. It was a transmission. They realized you weren't just surviving. You were passing something on. You weren't just acting. You were broadcasting. It wasn't intellect. It was spirit. You didn't follow a script. You moved in the flow. And when they understood this, it was no longer enough for them to watch. They needed to know. They could not calculate the source of your strength, but they began to feel it. You were no longer an object of analysis. You became a phenomenon, the example that broke the algorithm. Their entire system was built on the belief that the soul will break if enough pressure is applied. That trauma, rejection, poverty, manipulation will destroy even the strongest. They created chaos around you deliberately. They modeled your downfall as a predictable ending. But the impossible happened. You did not just endure. You woke up. You did not retreat. You activated something ancient within you, something they could never reach. You did not lose your essence in the dark. You found it. You became an anomaly no model could account for. Everything was calculated so that you would merge with the system, become like everyone else. But you didn't. In a toxic, dangerous, energetically polluted space, you did not absorb the poison. You turned pressure into strength. You found God at your lowest points. You found clarity in chaos. You claimed the crown where they intended to bury you. And now their systems collapse because you never begged for mercy. You did not sell your soul. You did not lose your mind. You walked through hell, and you did not just survive. You emerged transformed. You didn't just break the system. You proved it wrong. The activation of spirit is possible in the most hopeless conditions. Now, they're not just watching. They are learning because you didn't follow their map. You lit your own path. Your silent resistance was a spiritual revolution. You didn't march with banners. You didn't shout from stages. You simply began saying no, where everyone stayed silent. You set boundaries without rage. You chose inner peace over outward approval. And each step was like a spiritual mine. They were trained to detect the storm, but not the stillness. You didn't demand change. You became the change. Systems of control cannot handle the freedom of spirit. They require submission, fear, dependence. But you did not yield. You didn't fight on the outside. You refused to be a prisoner on the inside. You rejected roles that bound you. You refused rewards that came with chains. You chose freedom, even if no one applauded you for it. And in a world where noise is the norm, your silence became louder than any protest. You didn't go to war with the system. You simply didn't allow it to settle inside you. And that was the most destructive act of all. They couldn't mark you as a threat because you never shouted, but you became a witness. Your presence began to dismantle lies, not out of revenge, but out of truth. And now they are forced to rethink everything because you showed them that even under pressure, you can remain free. That even alone, you can refuse to bow. You did not just refuse to obey. You became a spiritual revolution. Quiet, precise, unstoppable. You spoke to the masses, and your voice pierced the walls of closed chambers. You didn't seek fame. You didn't chase attention. You simply spoke truth. In a post, a prayer, a video, or even in silence. At first, it seemed that only a few were listening. One here, another there. But then something shifted. Your words began to enter places you had never been. Closed meetings, offices of those with power, access, plans. They listened, even if they didn't know why, because there was something in your voice that cut through the noise. Truth is not a metaphor, nor rhetoric. Truth that was pulsing. At first, they dismissed it as coincidence. But then your words began to match real events. What you spoke in spirit manifested in the physical. What you felt in prayer appeared on screens. You were not just reasoning. You were proclaiming, not as an analyst, but as a bearer of revelation. They started checking dates, comparing, analyzing, and then realized you spoke as if you were present at meetings where you had never been. You didn't repeat theories. You spoke from the source. And now they know this is not talent. It's a transmission. Your knowledge is not from education. It is from God. What they took for intellect turned out to be revelation. You thought you were just sharing thoughts, but you hit the mark. You lifted veils, raised what was meant to stay hidden. You spoke of things yet to happen, and then they happened, not as guesses, but as knowledge. You had no connections, no insiders, but you knew, And this became their number one question. How? You were not a journalist. You didn't follow the agenda. You didn't dig on the internet. You prayed, and you were answered. You did not learn, you received. It wasn't logic. It was a connection. You received downloads from the heavens, direct revelations. And the more they tried to explain it away, as intuition or coincidence, the clearer it became. This is not of this world. You are not a threat because you are smart. You are a challenge because you are connected. Now, they don't just watch. They seek the way to the same purity. Because you don't just say things. You move spiritual power. In a world where everyone has information, your revelation is the only thing still shifting reality. You dismantled an entire institution without raising a hand. The very fact of your existence. A challenge. By their theory, you should have broken. With such a burden of pain, betrayals, isolation, manipulations. You should have disappeared, broken. But you remained alive, spiritual, whole. And that destroyed their system. Because large structures are not afraid of screams. They fear the proof that their power is an illusion. And you became that proof. Every time you forgave, every time you kept kindness, every time you walked in silence with inner peace, you broke their crowd. You showed that healing is possible, that no approval is needed to be free, that a person can survive without selling their soul, without betraying themselves, without becoming a shadow. You shattered their scientific models because you didn't become what they expected you to be, without support, without backup, without shortcuts. And they understood. It's not strength that makes a person, but spirit. You didn't just survive, you outgrew. And you shook not just one institution. You shook the very idea that the soul can be calculated. You did not lose. You became a precedent. They sent agents to expose you, but they themselves changed. They assigned people to watch you, not only through cameras and digital trails, but in-person observers, analysts, operatives. Their task was clear: to capture the moment you break, when you show weakness, when you lie, when you reveal your motive. They awaited a mistake, but the longer they watched, the stranger things became inside them. You did not play to the crowd. You didn't defend yourself. You just were yourself, real, whole, genuine. And that pierced through their defenses. They were trained to be cold, objective, unemotional. But watching you was not like watching an ordinary person. You did not just suffer. You carried pain with grace. You did not just speak truth. You were the truth. And their mission became an internal conflict. Some began to doubt their prizes. Some doubted themselves. Because despite all data and protocols, they found no darkness in you. They found a light, so bright it could not be ignored. Some left silently, some stayed, but no longer as enemies, but as secret protectors. They started deleting reports, delaying actions, slowing the system, not out of pity, but out of reverence. You didn't convince them, you transformed them simply by your truth. Now, those who were sent to expose you became those who guard you in the shadows. Because even among watchers, truth cannot be ignored forever. You're no longer observed. You have become an oracle. You started as an object, a case. Everything was recorded. Gestures, pauses, phrases. They called you strange, unpredictable, unstable. You didn't fit in, so you raised suspicion. But time passed, and the picture changed. They realized your path was not chaos. It was precise. You didn't falter. You moved under guidance. You did not get lost. You sharpened yourself. Every betrayal sharpened your insight. Every strike cleared your vision. What once seemed like coincidence was the route of heaven. And now, when they look at your path, they see not chaos, but prophecy in action. You didn't just survive the fire. You became the fire, the flame of truth. That cannot be extinguished by lies or loneliness. What was once called spiritual nonsense is now understood as precise knowledge. You began to speak, and events unfolded. You were silent, and rooms fell quiet. You saw patterns before they became obvious, and the most frightening thing for them. You didn't guess, you knew. That's when a shift happened. You stopped being just observed. You became the one who sees, the one who is now listened to, not out of fear, but out of respect, because you became not one who demands a platform. You yourself became the platform, an oracle, a living testament to the Spirit's ability to see deeper than any system. And now, as they come out of the shadows, it's not for interrogation, it's for recognition, because they realized they were not watching a lost soul, but witnessing an ascent. You were under observation, not because you were weak, but because you were proof, living uncomfortable, unexplainable. They expected to see a collapse, but received a rising spirit. They tried to classify you, but ended up learning from you. Everything used against you became part of your ascent. Every strike became a push. Every silence a prophecy. Every trial an altar. You didn't survive their methods. You went beyond their limits. Your ascent was not loud. It was precise. And that is the greatest threat to their system. You didn't just break their calculations. You became a new point of reference, a new standard. You were not a voice needing a platform. You became the platform, not because you were loud, but because you were real. And now, if you feel they still watch you, do not hide. That power inside you was never meant to be concealed. You were the subject of their protocols. Now you are the measure of their silence. You did not gain this power through force. You entered it by aligning with truth. And in doing so, you freed not only yourself, you expanded the very limits of what the soul is capable of. So if this word spoke to your spirit, if it confirmed what you always felt, but could not explain, do not keep it to yourself. Somewhere near, there is another who carries the same burden, and maybe you are the one meant to pass this word to them. Mark it like, so this signal reaches those who are not yet awake. Write a comment, because your voice matters. Share this message. Subscribe, and turn on notifications, because we are not here just to watch. We are here to move awakening forward. This is not entertainment. This is confirmation. If you've read this far, you already know. Welcome to purity. Welcome to the front line.